Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. Elena Voss had never felt her heart beat this fast. The Hilux limousine glided smoothly through the streets of Manhattan, the sunset reflecting across its tinted glass. The skyscrapers gradually fell behind, giving way to strips of suburban forest shifting color as the day neared its end. She leaned back, trying to maintain a calm exterior, but her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. She still didn't understand why her name appeared on the list for the three-day retreat reserved exclusively for senior leadership. She wasn't a director, nor did she lead any strategic division. Elena was only 25, an ordinary creative specialist who spent most of her time tweaking layouts and running deadlines until exhaustion. But the email sent to her inbox was real, and the person leading this retreat was very real. Lucien Hale. He existed like a gravitational field of his own inside the long car. When Elena dared to glance forward, she saw him seated at the front of the cabin, resting against the black leather seat. Simple in arrangement, yet effortlessly elegant. Light streamed through the window and fell across the sharp line of his collarbone, just visible beneath a shirt unbuttoned at the top. His slightly wavy black hair was tousled at one single point, an imperfection that made him even harder to look away from. Elena turned away immediately, as if his gaze alone could scorch her skin. She only wanted to survive these 3 days peacefully, keep her head down and avoid every pair of eyes. But just as Elena decided to stare out the window and forget his existence, the limousine passed through a sunlit stretch of road, and she caught Lucian's reflection on the glass beside her. Sculpted face, straight nose, eyes focused on the tablet as if the entire world was inside that screen. She shouldn't look, but somehow she did. And then, as if pulled taut by an invisible thread, Lucian lifted his head. His ash-gray eyes met hers. Just for a second so brief it could have been imagined. But Elena still felt something shift. His gaze lingered on her face long enough to make the air inside the car tip slightly. Long enough for her to realize she had forgotten to breathe. She turned away so quickly she nearly knocked into the seat. He lowered his gaze soon after, as though the moment had never happened. But the heart doesn't lie. The limousine slipped through the gates of Haven Crest Lodge just as dusk settled. Elena's eyes widened, momentarily forgetting her anxiety. The resort sat hidden in a valley like a scene from a high-budget sci-fi film. Walls of seamless glass, strips of dark pine wood, a lake stretching wide, reflecting the evening light like liquid silver pouring from the sky. It wasn't New York. It was cooler, clearer, and so quiet that Elena could hear her own heartbeat. She stepped out of the car, letting the forest breeze sweep through her hair and steady her breath. In all that vastness, she felt small, yet strangely stronger. The rear door of the limousine closed. Elena turned. Lucian stepped out, his tall frame stark against the deep blue sky. The wind brushed the hem of his suit jacket, sharpening every tailored line. His cologne drifted past, cedarwood with a hint of cool mint, and a shiver ran lightly down Elena's spine. He looked at her, not assessing, not as a boss looks at an employee, but a brief moment of stillness. Too calm, too focused, dangerous. She immediately walked faster toward the lobby, as if fleeing from something beginning to spark in her chest. After checking in, Elena headed to the glass elevator outside the main building. She hoped for a few minutes alone to steady herself, but just as the doors were closing, a strong hand stopped them. The doors slid open. Lucian stepped in. The space shrank instantly, pressing the air thin. The elevator climbed along the building's exterior, lifting them through streaks of thin clouds. The warm lights reflected against his face, giving him an almost unreal glow. Elena pressed herself against one side, staring down at her shoes to avoid his gaze. But she could feel him, not just through his slow, steady breathing, but through the energy radiating off him, warm and somehow dangerous. His scent wrapped around her, drawing her closer, even though she knew she shouldn't be anywhere near him. His voice broke the silence after a few seconds, deeper than usual. Voss, focus on your specialization. Everything else, Shouldn't concern you. The statement was entirely professional, but that voice, that presence, that proximity turned it into something so unexpectedly seductive that Elena felt her cheeks burn. She nodded without looking up. I understand, sir, she said, softer than she intended. The doors opened. Cool air rushed in, but the heat under her skin didn't fade. She stepped out first, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. After a few steps, she stopped, pressed a hand to her chest, and tried to steady her breathing. Lucian Hale was not the kind of man one could easily forget, and clearly, he was worse than all the rumors. She bit her lip, her heart racing uncontrollably. He really was dangerous, and for some reason she couldn't stop wanting to know what would happen next. The first day of the retreat opened inside a grand conference hall flooded with natural light. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls turned the pine forest outside into a living backdrop behind the podium. The lake reflected each ray of sunlight, making the entire room appear wrapped in a thin, shimmering veil of light. Elena chose a seat in the second row, close enough to hear clearly, yet far enough not to draw attention. She set down her laptop and scanned the room. Familiar faces from the executive team, people who usually existed only behind the sealed glass doors on the 52nd floor. And then Lucian walked in. No noise, no announcement. He simply appeared, and the room aligned itself. Conversations tapered off. Elena felt a chill along her spine as his gaze swept across the space. She lowered her eyes to her laptop screen. But fate, it seemed, wasn't on her side today. Throughout the hour-long strategic presentation, Elena could feel Lucian's gaze flicker in her direction. Not staring, not obvious, but that unconscious kind of attention. Except it wasn't entirely unintentional. She tried to focus on the slides, but each time she sensed that glance, her heart skipped a beat. Across the long table sat Theo Grant, the CFO, Lucian's best friend, and the only man close enough not to fear him, legs casually crossed, expression calm as someone watching a movie. His eyes drifted between Lucian and Elena, then Elena and Lucian, until finally Theo nudged Lucian's leg under the table. Lucian's brows tightened for the briefest second as he turned toward him. Theo lowered his voice just enough for Elena to barely catch it. You've been looking at her a bit too long, CEO? Lucian shot him a glare sharp enough to kill a weaker man on the spot. Theo merely shrugged, raised his coffee cup, and sipped as he just commented on the weather. A flicker of humor, small, rare, passed through Lucian's eyes before vanishing. Had Elena not looked up at that exact moment, she would have doubted her own eyesight. The tightness in her chest loosened ever so slightly. At least the air in the room wasn't completely frozen. But Marina Lorne, the vice president of operations, a woman with sleek brown hair tied back and a razor-sharp burgundy suit, noticed everything. Marina always stood beside Lucian during meetings and had never bothered to hide her ambition. When Lucian's gaze lingered on Elena a fraction of a second longer, Marina shifted just enough for Elena to catch the look in her eyes. Something displeased. A quiet jealousy slipped through the room like smoke. Elena felt it, clearly, and suddenly she wanted to escape this room more than anything. That evening, the resort glowed under strings of warm yellow lights wrapped around wooden columns and railings. The scent of pine drifted with every breeze, soothing in a way that almost felt unreal. Elena stepped onto the second-floor terrace to breathe, running her fingers through hair slightly curled by the damp air. Under the mountain sky, the golden lights cast her in a soft, warm hue. The pine trees rustled in the distance, creating a sound like nature whispering, gentle, steady, hypnotic. She closed her eyes, trying to shake off the day's lingering tension. Is the first day always this terrible? A deep but gentle male voice spoke beside her. Elena opened her eyes. Her stomach dropped. Lucian stood there, stripped of the impeccable CEO image he wore like armor. His suit jacket hung loosely over one shoulder. His tie was undone, top buttons open, exposing the strong line of his collarbone and a hint of his well-defined chest. His hair was slightly tousled, likely from the wind. Elena shouldn't look. But she did, and she couldn't stop. This version of him, relaxed, unguarded, a little worn but dangerously compelling, made her want to turn away and, at the same time, Step closer. Elena, he said, voice lower than she'd ever heard. Are you all right? I'm fine, she replied, though her voice trembled. Just needed some air. Lucian nodded and leaned an elbow on the wooden railing. The golden light softened his features, gentler than the man who commanded the room that morning. In that moment, he wasn't the billionaire CEO. He was just a man in the night, quiet and breathtakingly magnetic. You did well today, he said it simply, but Elena's heart thudded once more. I just tried not to mess anything up, she admitted, mortified enough to want to bury herself in the pine forest. You don't need to be afraid. I invited you here for a reason. Elena turned to him. What reason? Lucian studied her face in a brief silence, his gaze deep enough to pierce through layers of thought. Then slowly, deliberately, he said, because you're different. A jolt shot down Elena's spine. She didn't know if he meant professionally or something else, but either way, it left her breathless. The wind brushed across his hairline, sending a loose strand over his forehead. Elena felt an absurd urge to reach up and fix it. The thought alone made her blush. She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself, as if to contain something growing too fast inside her chest. We should get some rest, she whispered, steadying her voice. Lucian watched her for another heartbeat, then nodded. Sleep well, boss. His voice dipped so low it almost caressed her. Her step faltered as she walked away. And when the terrace door closed behind her, Elena knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't just dangerous. He was something she had to stay away from at all costs. But her heart whispered the opposite. The next morning opened with birds calling to one another from the tall pine branches, and the first rays of sunlight stretching into soft golden streaks across the wooden porch. The day's schedule read free, rest, recharge, a polite way of saying a day with no meetings, no strategy sessions, no networking. But for Elena, it felt more like an unexpected gift she didn't quite know how to use. She stepped out of her room after breakfast, her light shoes tapping the gravel-lined path. The mountain forest air was so clean it made her feel as though every stray thought in her head wanted to drift away with each breath. The wind carried the scent of pine resin with a faint chill, brushing her face like an encouraging pat on the shoulder. Elena began walking along the resort's main path, a neat stone walkway leading toward the spa and the large lake. But only a few minutes later, as the sunlight broke through a distant line of trees, she noticed something else. A small open space. A path with no sign, just a narrow slit between two rows of trees, like parted lips offering an invitation. She stopped. Not officially marked, she told herself. Clearly not for guests. But then the wind swept through, rustling the entire forest, and the sunlight scattered across the ground like strands of golden glitter. Her eyes instinctively followed the floating specks of light dancing in the air. The trail wasn't dark or ominous at all. It looked like an invitation, gentle, earnest, and quietly enchanting. Elena glanced around. No one nearby. And before reason could protest, her feet had already stepped onto the hidden path. The forest was deeper than she expected. Just 5 minutes of walking made Elena feel as if she were miles from the resort. Sunbeams pierced the canopy in shimmering stripes, and every time the breeze blew softly, the stripes shifted as if they were dancing. The scent of pine wood and damp earth blended together, calm and fresh, so much so that Elena felt her lungs expand, as though only today she was truly breathing. Each step over dry leaves felt like stepping into another version of the world, one that was more beautiful, quieter, without her boss's cold eyes, without pressure, without Marina's ambitious questions. Her shoulders loosened, and for the first time in months of exhausting work, she didn't feel compressed from all sides. Then she heard it. Water. Very faint at first, like whispering. Then clearer, stronger, like applause from an invisible choir. Her heart quickened with excitement. She followed the sound, her feet brushing over soft green moss and cool stone slabs. And then, when she stepped past a moss-covered arch of rock, the sight before her made her freeze in place. A hidden waterfall, about 30 feet tall, spilling into a pool clear as shattered glass. Sunlight streamed through the mist, forming a tiny rainbow floating right before her eyes. Below, the surface of the pool was smooth as a mirror, reflecting blue sky and trembling clusters of leaves. No people, no footprints, No trace of anything belonging to the busy world beyond. Elena stepped closer to the water's edge, her mouth slightly open in astonishment. She had never seen anything like this, wild yet beautiful in an almost unreal way. The scene made her feel as if time had been compressed, then slowly released, gently wrapping around her like water. She sat on a rock and placed a hand over her chest. Her heartbeat was peaceful in a way that felt unfamiliar. In her 2 years at Hale Lux, she had never once had a moment that felt as free as this. No eyes watching her, no expectations and no pressure. Just her and nature. The past months flickered through her mind. Sleepless nights finishing campaigns, moments of fearing judgment, meetings where Lucian's stern gaze always made her heart skip. All of it felt like heavy layers now peeling off one by one. Elena leaned down and touched the surface of the pool. Cold, clear, pure. She loosened her hair tie, letting her hair fall naturally over her shoulders, the breeze brushing along her neck like a soft caress. Her heart said the thing her mind didn't want to acknowledge. She wanted to become part of this place, completely, unrestrained, unwatched, unfiltered. She stood. Sunlight filtered through the leaves and spilled across her skin. She looked around again. The clearing was entirely empty. Beneath the water, the pebbles gleamed. The white curtain of the waterfall looked like it had been painted by a careful hand. The space felt so safe it gave her courage. And in a moment, she never imagined she would have. Elena smiled. A small smile, private and delicate. She lifted her hands and pulled her t-shirt over her head. Then her jeans slipped down her long legs. No rush, no urgency. Just her and the freedom she had lost for too long. The morning sun made her skin glow like honey. The wind wrapped around her body, soft as silk. In the silence of the forest, she felt herself return to her most original form, unjudged, unmeasured, unburdened. She stepped into the pool, the coldness making her body tremble. Present, alive, real. And when the water engulfed her fully, coolness rushing down her spine, Elena knew one thing. This moment was hers, not meant for anyone else, not meant to be told, just the release her heart had longed for, and she had no idea that destiny was about to enter this scene. Unexpected, unforgettable. The cold water wrapped around Elena's body like a sweet shock. She drew in a deep breath as the surface broke around her, ripples glimmering beneath the sun. The vast blue sky overhead reflected on the lake like a perfect mirror, disturbed only by her, a lone figure in the immensity of nature. She had removed each layer of clothing, folding them neatly on a rock, a reflex of her orderly nature, before stepping into the water when no one was around, when there was no pressure, no scrutiny, no gaze except the sunlight painting soft golden fragments across her skin. The sensation was liberating enough to make her tremble. Elena swam toward the waterfall. The cascade plunging from 30 feet above sounded like a living symphony, powerful, relentless, yet strangely harmonious. When the water pounded onto her shoulders, it washed away every trace of exhaustion. The endless meetings, the rumors, Marina's icy stare, and even Lucian Hale, the man whose mere presence sent her heart spiraling into chaos. She closed her eyes, tilted her head back, and let the water rush from her crown down her spine. The roar of the waterfall, the whisper of the wind, the frantic beat of her newly freed heart, all of it blended into a moment so achingly beautiful she almost cried. Elena turned and swam back toward the shore. Her hair, darkened by water, clung to her neck. Sunlight coated her wet shoulders in a radiant sheen. As she rose in the shallows, droplets slid along her skin like invisible fingers, ticklish, electric, and disturbingly alive. She ran a hand over her face, the water tracing the curve of her back, her slim waist down her long legs. And then, a faint sound, a branch shifting. Elena spun around. Her heart stopped. Lucian Hale was standing there, just a few yards away. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His gray eyes widened, stripped of the usual controlled, frigid composure. Sunlight reflecting off the water on her skin seemed to rob him of air. For a long, suspended moment, he stood frozen, utterly undone by what he saw. "Oh my God!" Elena let out a strangled yelp, and immediately sank into the water up to her shoulders, arms crossing over her chest. Her face burned so hot she could have boiled the lake. What are you doing here? She stammered. Lucian jolted as if awakening from a trance. He whipped around, too quickly, his suit jacket nearly slipping from his hand. One palm braced against a tree trunk, while the other clenched his coat so tightly it seemed his entire self-control hinged on that grip. I didn't know anyone was here, he said, voice rough, strained, and lower than usual. He was clearly trying to make the situation normal, but every syllable betrayed the opposite. I was just walking. Thought I heard water. Elena wished she could disappear from the planet. The water was too shallow to hide. The distance between them was too short, and the feeling inside her, too real. Don't turn around, she blurted, panicking. I won't, he exhaled, almost a vow. But from the way his hand gripped the tree, so hard his knuckles whitened, Elena knew he was just as shaken as she was. Silence thickened around them, taut and breathless. Elena trembled, not from the cold. And Lucian, she could tell he didn't dare breathe too deeply. They were trapped in a moment no sensible adult would ever want. Yet neither of them fully wanted to escape. Elena swallowed hard and slowly swam toward the rock where her folded clothes waited. Her movements were clumsier than usual. Her hands trembled like they were electrified. Water dripped from her shoulders, slid down her arms, and hit the stone below in soft, relentless taps. Meanwhile, Lucian stood with his back turned, body so tense his shirt stretched across his muscles. He looked like a statue just awakened, breathing hard yet holding himself together with painful restraint. You're still there? Elena asked, forcing her voice to steady. I'll leave as soon as you tell me you're safe. Safe. That word made her blush harder. I'm going to get dressed. Just don't turn around. Lucian didn't answer, but she heard his breath deepen, heavy and ragged, as if he'd been running. Not from distance, but from desire. Elena climbed onto the rock, the air instantly raising goosebumps along her wet skin. She tried to dress quickly, but everything was more difficult than she expected. Her shirt clung stubbornly, her jeans refused to pull up over damp hips and thighs. She muttered under her breath, torn between humiliation and the urge to scream. Finally she managed, messy, but decent enough not to die of shame. Oh, okay. You can turn around. Lucian turned slowly, as though any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile barrier kept them sane. When his gaze met hers, Elena inhaled sharply. Gone was the workplace stare. Gone was the detached CEO. Lucian Hale's eyes burned. Not loud, not violent, but a quiet, smoldering fire. Deep, dangerous, and raw, an emotion he had buried beneath ice for years, now cracked open by accident. Voss, he murmured, voice so husky she felt it in her chest, not just her ears. Elena stepped back, heart racing as she'd sprinted uphill. If she didn't know him, she might have mistaken it for anger. But she wasn't wrong. It was a desire, laced with fear, laced with restraint, laced with something deeper neither of them dared to name. Elena stared at him, longer than she had ever allowed herself to, and all she could think in that moment was, if she got any closer to him, her heart would never survive. Elena couldn't remember how long she had walked to make it back to the resort. All she knew was that every step felt like pressing down on a new layer of air. Thinner, thicker, heavier, harder to breathe. She walked in front. Lucian followed behind, keeping a safe distance but still close enough for her to feel his breath whenever the wind shifted. Neither of them spoke, but the silence wasn't normal. It vibrated like a tightened string, each step stretching a note that was ready to snap. Elena clenched her hands. The image of him at the lakeside, those gray eyes wide, startled, wanting, pulled toward her as if caught in a force beyond reason, kept flashing through her mind. She shook her head sharply, but it wouldn't fade. She had seen desire in his eyes, and the terrifying truth was she wanted him too. They walked past tall rows of pines. The late afternoon light filtered through the leaves, leaving the forest dappled in gold, as if the entire woodland were spotlighting this strange scene. Two people pretending to be calm while their hearts were racing wildly in their chests. When the resort appeared between the trees, Elena exhaled in fake thin relief. She was about to hurry into the lobby when his voice cut through the air behind her, low and strained. Elena. She stopped. He stepped closer. Not too close, not touching her, but close enough that their breaths collided in the small space between them. Lucian looked straight into her eyes and then, very slowly, as if confessing a sin, "I will never look at you the same again." Elena froze, not because the words were careless, but because they were too honest, too bare, too easy for her heart to melt into. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Lucian held her gaze for one more second, a single second that felt capable of changing the trajectory of her entire life, before he turned away. He didn't wait for an answer, didn't explain. He practically fled from his own confession. Elena let her knees weaken, leaning back against the wooden wall by the lobby entrance. She needed air. She needed something sharp to cut through the feeling spreading over her whole body. But nothing cut it. Nothing stopped it. And the worst part was she liked the feeling. Lucian entered the leadership meeting room 3 minutes late. For him, 3 minutes late was practically a seismic event. The department head stood respectfully out of habit, but Elena noticed immediately. His hair was slightly messy. His immaculate shirt bore signs that he had buttoned it back up in a rush. There was still a faint flush along his neck, like someone who had run harder than usual. And his eyes never once crossed hers. Theo, standing beside the conference table, raised an eyebrow. "You look like someone just pushed you into a lake," he said, half joking, half serious. Lucian set the documents down harder than he meant to. Nothing happened. Theo narrowed his eyes, the look of a man far too smart to believe any weak excuse. "Nothing. Yet you walk in here looking like a man who left his soul somewhere? Messy hair? Crooked shirt? This might be a new record for destroying your perfect image. CEO." Lucian didn't reply. He shot Theo a sharp look, telling him to stop. But Theo had never been afraid of Lucian. Not once. He simply folded his arms, went quiet, but his blue-gray eyes gleamed with curiosity. He was starting to suspect. Elena sat in the staff lounge, rolling across the bed restlessly. The waterfall scene replayed like a film she couldn't pause. His eyes, his voice, the way he walked away but somehow still remained. She wanted to forget, but her mind betrayed her. It kept every detail crisp to the point of pain. That night, the resort was silent. Golden lights lined the hallways, casting warm halos that weren't nearly warm enough to cool the heat spreading inside Elena. She lay in bed, blanket pulled up to her chest, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling. Every tiny sound, the wind through the pines, the soft creak of wood expanding in the cold, made her hyper-aware of the fact that her heart no longer felt like it belonged to her. She tried to think about work, about the project, about tomorrow's presentation, but every time she tried to focus, Lucian's face appeared in front of her. She turned in bed. Then it turned again, then buried her face into the pillow. "He's dangerous," she whispered into the dark, but her heart answered, dangerous enough to make her want to run toward him rather than away. In another room, several hallways away, Lucian Hale was living through the same hell. He sat in a chair by the window, suit jacket tossed over the sofa, tie loosened. He hadn't turned on the lights. Moonlight shone through the glass, stretching into a pale strip across the wooden floor. He leaned his head against the chair, hand covering his eyes, trying to erase the image of Elena at the lake, wet, glowing, beautiful enough to steal the breath from his lungs. And the thing that devastated him wasn't the sight itself. It was the truth. He had already liked Elena before today, and he knew it. Not from today, not from seeing her bathed in forest light. It had started quietly, long ago at the office, slipping in when he wasn't paying attention. The way she raised her hand to challenge ideas in meetings, steady and unapologetic. The spark in her eyes whenever she talked about a new concept. Her calm resilience under pressure. And most of all, the way she never tried to impress him like everyone else. There were nights he stood by the glass wall of the 52nd floor, trying to convince himself that glancing toward Elena's desk more often than others was meaningless. Times in the elevator when he had to swallow back words he wanted to say just to keep the distance intact. And in the limousine on the first day of the retreat, When Elena accidentally caught his gaze reflected in the window, his heart had truly skipped. He knew, but he told himself, I can control this. He always controlled things, feelings, people, himself. He always shut everything down before it sparked. Until today, until he saw Elena standing in the cool water of the forest. It wasn't just her body's beauty. It wasn't just the way sunlight draped over her skin. It was because in that moment, Elena was free. Free in a way he had never been. Free in a way that made him want to step into her world. Touch that feeling. Live honestly, even for just 1 second. She stood there like a raw piece of nature's soul. Unguarded, unhidden, untouched by the fear that haunted him. And that destroyed him. Not through his eyes, through his heart. But his world didn't allow such things. Another memory crashed in, sharp as broken glass. His father. The scandal with an employee. The family collapses. The company is in chaos. His mother was on the kitchen floor, her eyes empty. That day, Lucian learned the pain of losing trust, and he swore, never fall for an employee, never soften, never let emotions ruin everything he was protecting. He became a man wrapped in armor, allowed to look, never to touch, allowed to feel, only to kill it immediately. He had lived like that his entire life, until this afternoon, when she tilted her head under the waterfall, sunlight painting her skin in golden streaks. One moment, one glance, one breath skipping, and he lost control. This is bad, he whispered as if tearing the words from his chest. In all his 35 years, he had never lost control like this. He had said something he should never have said. I will never look at you the same again. He wanted to take it back, but he couldn't, because it was the truth. And that was the problem, because he knew if his heart had shifted, even for a fraction of a second, then every rule, every vow, every layer of ice he had held onto his entire life would no longer hold. Elena Voss didn't just make him lose composure, she made him feel alive. She awakened something he had buried for years, the desire to love, and something even more dangerous, hope. Lucian closed his eyes, resting his forehead against the chair. Not tonight, and maybe not any night as long as she was here. His phone buzzed, Theo calling. He picked up. I've got a problem, he said into the dark. On the other end, Theo laughed, soft but sharp. Not a problem, a woman. A pause. And I think I know which one. Lucian tightened his grip on the phone as if he could crush it, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he wanted to escape this feeling. The main conference room of the resort gleamed beneath the early sunlight. Tall glass walls made the pine forest outside feel as though it had stepped indoors, casting a pale golden sheen across the long meeting table. Elena entered with a stack of documents clutched to her chest, trying to look composed despite the aftershocks of a sleepless night still rattling inside her. Lucian was already seated at the head of the table, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the large screen. He didn't look at her, but Elena could feel him. His presence was like a gravitational pull, draining all the oxygen toward him. Good morning, Marina said the moment Elena sat down. Her voice was sweet, her eyes anything but. I heard you'll be presenting the European expansion project today. Quite a big task for someone with such limited experience. Silence dropped over the room. Elena felt her shoulders tense. A direct hit, in front of every superior. Classic Marina. Elena inhaled deeply, lifted her chin. Yes, she replied calmly. And I believe the quality of the work is what matters, not the number of years on a resume. Clean, sharp, not a tremor. Some department heads exchanged surprised looks. At the end of the table, Lucian shifted. His eyes found Elena. He said nothing. But in that fleeting glance, a quiet spark of pride flashed. Elena felt it so clearly she wanted to look away. Begin then, Marina said, arms crossed like she was settling in for entertainment. Elena opened her slides, but Marina wasn't done. Let's hope this presentation isn't shallow like the last one. Just a friendly warning. The air chilled. Several people lowered their eyes. Elena tightened her grip on her laptop, but before she could respond, Lucian's voice cut through the room, low, cold, sharp as ice. That's enough, Marina. The room froze. Lucian had never intervened so publicly before. He planted both hands on the table, his gaze like a blade aimed straight at Marina. "Personal attacks have no place at Hale Lux," he said, each word so precise it might as well have been etched into the wood. "And Elena is not inexperienced. She's here because of competence, not because someone carried her in." Elena nearly forgot to breathe. Marina's face twitched, just slightly. A CEO defending an employee this fiercely. "How fascinating," Marina murmured, acidic. Lucian didn't blink. "I defend professionalism," he replied. No one in the room fully believed that, especially not Marina. And Elena didn't dare lift her head. The sound of her name and his voice alone was enough to make her heart tremble. She began presenting the European expansion plan, and by the third slide, the room had transformed. Eyes, once skeptical, sharpened with attention. Marina clenched her jaw as department heads nodded at the insights Elena delivered. Theo, seated 2 chairs behind Lucian, tilted his head as though dissecting every word she spoke. Elena spoke with a confidence she hadn't known she possessed. Every chart, every argument was concise, strategic. Her voice was smooth yet firm, not pleading for approval, but delivering conclusions like someone who already owned the room. By the time she clicked to the final slide, the room held its breath. Then came applause, genuine applause. Not polite, not forced, real. Marina's expression soured. The others looked stunned, and Elena finally looked up. Lucian was watching her as though she were the only light still burning in the room. His eyes were not warm, not soft, not inviting, but so intense that Elena felt the rest of the world fade until there were only 2 of them left. It terrified her in the most impossible way. He believed in her, and he was proud. Emotions she had never seen in his eyes and had never received from anyone. She looked away before her heart caught fire at the conference table. When the meeting ended, Marina stalked out with a trail of department heads behind her, her gaze sharp and suspicious as needles. Elena knew. Marina had noticed. Theo followed Lucian out. When the hallway emptied, leaving just the 2 men, Theo nudged Lucian's shoulder. "You're really gone for her, aren't you?" Lucian stopped walking. For 2 seconds, he didn't speak. Didn't move. But his eyes, focused somewhere beyond the glass doors, beyond the forest, beyond everything, said it all. Theo chuckled softly, not surprised. "Knew it." Lucian inhaled deeply, turning toward his friend. "No," he said quietly. "I can't. I'm not allowed to." Theo crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. "Yeah, but that's not what I asked." Lucian fell silent. His heartbeat thundered. And for the first time in years, the armored CEO of Hale Lux could no longer deny what he felt. Elena stepped outside into the sunlit terrace, her hands still trembling. She didn't know what would happen next. But she knew one thing. She was standing at a boundary, and Lucian Hale, the most dangerous man in her life, was standing on the other side, one step closer, and everything would change. Elena closed her door and leaned back against the wooden panel as if she had just escaped a storm. The darkened room was lit only by the soft glow of a warm yellow lamp, making everything look gentler, safer, everything except her heart. It beat out of rhythm without logic, driven by a primal instinct she was afraid to name. She hadn't even relaxed her shoulders when, knock, knock. The sound at the door, not loud, not rushed, but enough to make her entire world tilt. Elena closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and opened the door. Lucian Hale stood there. No suit, no tie, just a white shirt with the top 2 buttons undone, sleeves rolled high, his hair slightly messy as if he'd spent the entire evening fighting with himself. The hallway light cast shadows along the sharp line of his jaw, but his gray eyes, they were soft in a way Elena had never seen. "We need to talk," he said quietly. His voice stole every bit of oxygen from her room. Elena nodded lightly and stepped aside for him to enter. The door closed. The space instantly became too small, too quiet, too full of unspoken things. Lucian stood in the middle of her room, hands hanging at his sides as if he had no idea what to do with them. A long moment passed, silent, electric. Finally, he exhaled. "These past few months," he began, his voice so low she had to take a step closer to hear him. I thought I could control it. Elena swallowed. Lucian continued. I thought, if I kept my distance, if I stayed cold enough, if I didn't look for more than 3 seconds, everything would be fine. He lifted his head and that look pushed Elena back half a breath. But today when you stood there presenting in front of the room, I knew I had already lost. Elena felt her legs weaken. She tried, but no sound came out. Lucian took one step, just one, but it felt like the ground moved. I ran away, he admitted. I dodged it. I buried it. I lied to myself and said I only admired your talent. A pause. But the truth is, I noticed you the first day you walked into the interview room. Elena's eyes widened. Lucian let out a faint pain smile, rare and fragile. You stood in front of my desk, hands shaking, but your voice was steady in a way that stunned me. You talked about the authors you loved as if they were close friends living inside your heart. He spoke so slowly it felt as though time was stretching. That night, he added, I went home and read everything. Everything? Elena whispered. The books you mentioned, Lucian said, his voice deepening. I read Hemingway, Morrison, Angelo. I even read the one you said, no one but you has the patience for. Elena felt dizzy. Why would you do that? Lucian looked at her as though the answer was obvious. Because I wanted to understand the world inside your head. The words dropped, heavy and beautiful, so much so that Elena felt tears threaten. She stepped back until her spine hit the wall. The room seemed to spin. Lucian approached, stopping just inches away, close enough for her to feel his breath on her lips. Lucian, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't say my name like that, he murmured. I'll lose control. You can't, Elena's voice cracked. You can't say things like this. You can't look at me like that. Like what? Elena, one word, one exposed soul. Like I'm the only thing you want to touch. Lucian braced one hand against the wall beside her head. In that moment, no CEO, no rules, no armor. Just a man standing before the woman he had spent months trying to outrun. He lowered his head. His forehead touched hers. One breath, one heartbeat, one surrender. Elena, he whispered, tell me to stop. Elena said nothing. She couldn't. With a trembling breath, she touched the collar of his shirt. A small touch, but Lucian collapsed into it. He lifted her face. Their lips met. Not gently, not cautiously, not politely. It was the kiss of two people who had forbidden themselves for far too long. A kiss born from silence, from restraint, from desire compressed so tightly it only took a spark to burn the entire world down. Elena grabbed his collar and pulled him closer. Lucian wrapped an arm around her waist, drawing her flush against him as if he needed her near to believe this was real. The kiss deepened, intoxicating, dangerous, beautiful like a movie scene no theater would ever dare show. Lucian whispered between breaths, I tried to forget you. Another kiss. But every time you look at me, another kiss, so deep Elena felt the world tilt. Everything falls apart. They nearly crossed the line. Another button on his shirt slipped undone. Elena's fingers brushed across his skin. Their breaths tangled like an explosion. But then Elena stopped. She placed a hand on his chest. Lucian froze instantly, though his eyes still burned. Elena! She looked down, fighting for air. I don't want, she whispered, to become your dirty secret. Pain flashed in Lucian's eyes. Not the pain of rejection, but of understanding. The warm, yellow light fell over them. Two people pressed close, breathing hard, hearts breaking open, but still clinging to the last line between them. Lucian nodded slowly, his forehead still against hers. You will never be my secret. That promise, spoken in a low, trembling, honest voice, made the world tilt again inside Elena's chest. The door had opened, and there was no turning back. The morning after the forbidden kiss, the resort lay beneath a thin veil of mist, like a sheer bridal veil draped across the pine forest. Elena stood by her bedroom window, fingertips pressed to her lips as though she could still feel Lucian's warmth there. She didn't know what would happen today, but she never expected the explosion to come this soon. Marina had been awake since 5 a.m. She stood hidden behind the wooden staircase, phone raised, camera lens pointed at the third-floor hallway, waiting for the exact moment Lucian Hale stepped into Elena's room last night. No knocking, no announcement, just a blurry picture. But blurry was enough to twist the truth, and Marina smiled like someone who had finally fired the first bullet in a war she'd been preparing for far too long. The rumor spread like an electric shock. The CEO entered a female employee's room at midnight. She's new, but she moves fast. Elena Voss. Didn't know she was his type. Whispers sliced across Elena's back like knives as she walked into the lounge for coffee. A group of department heads stopped talking when she passed. They stared at her as if she were the first stain in the company's pristine history. Elena froze. Her heart dropped. She knew exactly what this meant. She knew her world had just cracked open, and just as she tried to breathe, "Voss!" Theo's voice came from behind. Elena turned. Theo wasn't smiling. No jokes. His face was stone, his eyes heavier than usual. "Come with me," he said. They stepped into a small meeting room. The door closed. Elena didn't even get a word out before Theo planted both hands on the table and leaned in. "The rumors are spiraling," he said bluntly. "And before Lucian blows this resort off the map, I need to know exactly what happened." Elena opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her face burned. Shame, fear, and the chaos of emotions she hadn't had time to sort. Theo studied her for 2 seconds, long enough to know she wasn't lying. He exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. "Damn it," he muttered. "He's really in deep." By noon, the drama hit its peak. Elena was on the grand terrace overlooking the lake, trying to breathe when Marina appeared. Not alone. 3 others flanked her. Her smile was a blade. "Well, Voss," Marina said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Enjoying the perks of a busy night?" Elena went rigid. "Marina, I think you've misunderstood." "Misunderstood," Marina laughed. "We have a photo of the CEO entering your room. What more do you want to explain?" Every gaze on the terrace swung toward Elena. Some pitying, some judgmental, some are hungry for scandal. Elena wanted to speak. She wanted to explain, but she knew. Words meant nothing once people chose their version of the truth. Marina stepped closer, whispering just loud enough. "You should start drafting your resignation. The CEO can protect you, but the board won't." Elena bit her lip, fighting the tremor in her body. Marina moved back to the center, voice sharp as glass. "Let me make this clear. I'm not insulting you. I'm protecting the company from a woman who uses her body to climb the—" "Enough!" A man's voice cut through the terrace, hard and cold. Everyone turned. Theo stood at the glass door. And then, like a scene from a movie, he stepped out and positioned himself beside Elena, a living shield. "Marina," Theo said, "spread rumors all you want. Just don't pretend you're honest." Marina scoffed. "Stay out of this, Theo. This is metadata." The terrace fell silent. Theo crossed his arms, chin raised like a dare. "You want evidence? Fine. But the metadata on that photo is about to eat you alive." Marina blanched. Theo continued. "The picture was edited. The timestamp doesn't match. And security footage shows you in the hallway at 11:50 p.m., 10 minutes before the rumor appeared." He shrugged. "Clever, but not enough." Elena's eyes widened. She hadn't known Theo had gone this far for her. Marina stammered, I just, are you fabricating accusations, harassing a colleague, and violating company ethics?" Theo said, voice dry as sandpaper. "Want me to keep going?" Footsteps echoed. Lucian Hale appeared. The terrace stopped breathing. He looked at Marina first, his gaze sharp enough to break bone. "You're suspended," Lucian said, voice cold and clean like steel-splitting stone. "Effective immediately." Marina's face drained of color. You can't." "I already did." Lucian turned to the nearby HR staff, frozen. "I want a full audit of her conduct for the last 6 months. I want a report in 48 hours. No one dared question him. Marina was escorted away, her steps faltering. When she disappeared, only the wind and the stunned stares remained, every eye locked on Elena. Lucian moved closer, step by deliberate step, slow, certain, lethal. Elena stood still, hands clasped. She feared his gaze, because it carried too much, too real. Lucian stopped in front of her, and in full view of everyone. He took her hand, no hesitation, no secrecy, no fear of witnesses. A simple gesture, yet so powerful the air seemed to fracture around them. Lucian spoke softly, but his voice carried, "No one, I repeat, no one insults her." Elena looked at him. He looked at her. The entire resort watched. And in that blazing moment, rumors stopped being frightening, because Lucian had chosen her, publicly, unequivocally, without a single doubt. The city welcomed them back with towering glass buildings and a thin gray sky that looked ready to drop a storm at any second. But the tension hanging inside the limousine was heavier than any incoming thundercloud. Elena sat beside Lucian in the back seat. He held her hand, not like a lover, but like a man about to walk into battle and refusing to let go of his armor. In the rearview mirror, watching them both, Theo frowned. "Remember," Theo said, voice low, "the moment we walk in, it's gunfire. No bowing." Lucian stared straight ahead. "Elena doesn't bow to anyone." The words made her turn toward him, heart tightening with a mix of fear and emotion. They stopped in front of Hailux headquarters, a 50-plus-story monolith of glass reflecting the evening sky like a warship preparing to fire. The car door opened. Lucian stepped out first. Elena followed, and his hand immediately found hers. They walked into the building hand in hand, and just like that, they entered the battlefield. The meeting room stretched long like a courtroom hall, the ebony table gleaming under the ceiling lights. 15 board members sat in a row, each with a different gaze, judgmental, furious, disbelieving, and a few eager for drama. Elena wanted to let go of his hand. Lucian tightened his grip. Richard Sterling, chairman of the board, Lucian's uncle, slammed his pen against the table. "The meeting begins. Lucian, we're waiting for your explanation." Lucian stood tall, no hesitation, no detours. "I am in a relationship with Elena Voss." The room exploded like someone had struck a barrel of gunpowder. "Unacceptable! Do you realize what you've done? A CEO dating a subordinate? Do you want the stock to crash?" Several others shook their heads, typing furiously as they documented every word. Richard turned to Elena, eyes cold and sharp. "And you? Seducing your CEO?" Elena paled, but she didn't get to respond. The doors flew open. Marina stormed in. No pristine suit, no confident stride, but her eyes still blazing with schemes. "I have evidence," Marina screeched. "She initiated everything. I want the board to see the images." "Sit down," Richard ordered. Marina shot Elena a triumphant look before sitting. Elena tried to breathe but couldn't. Richard looked at her as if she were a contaminant. "Miss Voss, your response?" Elena stood. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I accept responsibility. I am prepared to submit my resignation." Lucian snapped his head toward her. "Elena, no!" She continued, refusing to meet his eyes. "Lucien is the best CEO this company has ever had. I don't want the company, or his career, to suffer because of me. If someone has to leave, it should be me." Whispers spread like wildfire. Marina smiled, thinking she'd won. But Lucian stood immediately, his voice so cold that everyone froze. "If she leaves, I leave with her." Chaos erupted. Richard shot to his feet. "Lucian, have you lost your mind?" Lucian didn't waver. "I will not run a company built on deceit. If Elena is punished for being honest, I don't belong in this position anymore." The table practically caught fire. "Are you threatening the board? You're willing to risk the company for one female employee? Lucian, this is your family's legacy." Elena turned toward him, tears flooding her eyes. "Please don't do this. Not because of me." Lucian looked at her, his gray eyes burning. "I told you, Elena, you will never be my dirty secret." Just as the room was about to implode, Theo stood, and silence fell instantly. Hale Lux's CFO rarely stood up, but when he did, everyone listened. Theo buttoned his vest, facing Richard. I would like to speak as CFO and as the man responsible for this company's financial stability. Richard nodded. Go on. Theo opened his laptop and projected onto the screen. 3 charts, 2 data tables, 1 slide that made Marina flinch. First, Theo said, Elena Voss's European project. These are the market test results. Do you see this? The graph shot upward. Members murmured. Projected 38% growth in Germany. France responded this well. Italy has conversion rates like that? Theo tapped the table. In plain terms, Hale Lux cannot afford to lose Elena Voss. He switched slides. Second, the metadata behind Marina's image leak. The screen displayed editing history, timestamps, and discrepancies. Theo didn't smile, but his eyes were razor sharp. The image was tampered with, and Marina was in the hallway the moment the rumor spread. I checked the cameras. Marina stood violently. You had no right. Theo ignored her. And finally, he addressed the board, the CEO you're questioning. For 15 years, Lucian has brought record profits, expanded global market share, and led strategies entire industries scrambled to follow. He leaned forward, palms on the table. And you want to fire him because he fell in love with a competent, adult woman who did nothing wrong? Silence, Theo concluded. If you lose these 2 people, that failure will not belong to them. It will belong to this board. A final blow that tore the room apart. The board deliberated in private for 40 minutes. Elena and Lucian sat outside, silent. Elena's hands were ice cold, and Lucian held them tightly without letting go. When the doors opened, Richard stepped out. I will announce the decision. Elena squeezed her eyes shut. Lucian stood close to her. Richard looked at them both for a long moment before speaking. The board agrees to allow the 2 of you to continue your relationship. Elena opened her eyes. Richard continued. With the following conditions, Elena will report directly to CFO Theo Grant. Both parties must be transparent about all work-related interactions. The relationship will be monitored for conflicts of interest for 12 months. Finally, Marina Monroe is permanently terminated from Hale Lux. Marina screamed as security dragged her out. No one cared. Elena stared at Richard in disbelief. Lucian turned to her, chest rising and falling. Elena, he whispered, we did it. She couldn't hold back anymore. She threw herself into his arms, right in the executive hallway, in front of Richard, the board, and half a dozen stunned employees. Lucian wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close, hiding nothing. A cinematic moment that stole every gaze in the corridor. The battle was over, no casualties, no surrender, and the 2 of them had just defeated the world. The storm didn't start inside Hale Lux. It detonated out there, on news sites, on television, in a barrage of messages as if the entire world had just discovered a new favorite pastime. Elena's name was everywhere within hours. Blurry photos, sensational headlines screaming like fire alarms, CEO dating employee, power scandal, beauty makes the CEO lose control. Nothing mattered more than a narrative someone could twist into whatever shape they wanted. Inside the 62nd floor CEO office, Elena sat on the leather sofa, her back stiff with tension. On the tablet in front of her, venomous comments poured in, words sharp as needles. The door burst open. Theo stepped in, holding 2 cups of hot coffee, the steel gray suit making him look like a block of granite on legs. He set 1 cup beside Lucian, who stood silently before the wall of glass, staring at the gloomy sky outside. Drink, Theo said, calm but not gentle. And remember, love doesn't make a CEO stupid, unless the CEO lets it. Lucian turned his head slightly, storm still flickering in his eyes. You're saying I'm letting it happen. I'm saying, Theo replied, that the media has no right to define your relationship. If you panic, they win. If you go silent, they win. If you react emotionally, they still win. He raised a brow, staring at Lucian as the only friend who dared look at him like a regular human being. But if you stand up straight and tell the truth, they'll have to rearrange their worldview. Elena's lips twitched, just a ghost of a smile. She had never realized a CFO could be both dry and unexpectedly warm at the same time. Lucian inhaled deeply, tapped the side of the coffee cup, then looked at Elena as if a decision had finally clicked into place. All right, he said, we're not hiding. And that afternoon, when the press conference doors opened, flashbulbs burst like fireworks. Elena walked beside Lucian, feeling as if she were stepping into the very center of a tornado. Lucian squeezed her hand before taking the podium, a small gesture heavier than any speech he could give. Reporters fired questions like arrows. Are you exploiting a subordinate? Did you use romance to advance your position? When did this relationship start? Is there a conflict of interest? Lucian lifted a hand, and the chaos snapped into silence. The relationship between myself and Elena Voss, he said, voice low and unwavering, is not a scandal, not exploitation, not favoritism. It is a connection between two consenting adults, reviewed and approved by the board of directors. He paused for half a beat, eyes shifting to Elena. And it's real. Elena tightened her grip on the mic. Her knees trembled, but her voice was clear as glass. I haven't been given preferential treatment, and the European expansion reports and strategy I presented speak for themselves. I am transparent. We are transparent. Some reporters lowered their cameras, their expressions softening, as though they just witnessed something rare in the financial world. Sincerity. Lucian finished with a line that sliced the storm clean in half. We do not ask permission to love, but we will uphold our responsibilities and our ethics. That does not change. No one spoke, not because they lacked questions, but because none could push past the iron resolve in his voice. Time passed, and the thing Elena never expected happened. She grew stronger in the very space the media tried to collapse around her. Her European expansion campaign exploded. Conversion rates in Italy hit record highs, feedback from Germany exceeded projections, and France practically opened its doors to Hilux with both arms. People started speaking of her differently, not as that girl, but as her, as Elena Voss, the strategist the company can't afford to lose. And through it all, Lucian watched her with a gaze transformed. Not the gaze of a CEO in control, but of a man in love for the first time, unafraid to be seen without armor. He learned to soften, to let her lead, to stand behind her without overshadowing her. And that, the space he gave her, the pride he never voiced, moved Elena more than any "I love you" ever could. On the weekend after the press release went live, and financial analysts began praising the European campaign, Lucian brought Elena to the penthouse. The glass doors were open, the city sprawled below them like a galaxy built of steel and light. Towers shimmered gold, and the river of traffic below pulsed like veins inside a living giant. Elena stepped onto the balcony, palms on the cold steel railing, the wind lifting her blouse. Lucian came behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her against his chest. She felt his heartbeat, steady, grounded, as if trying to tell her that nothing outside this moment could touch them. Are you scared? He asked, voice deep as the night wind. Yes, Elena admitted, but I think I'm getting used to it. Lucian lowered his head, his lips brushing the crown of her hair, so soft it made her want to cry. I won't let anyone hurt you, not the media, not public opinion, not my past. Elena turned to face him, the city lights reflected in Lucian's gray eyes, making them burn like something alive. Lucien. He lowered his head. This kiss was nothing like the waterfall kiss. No explosion, no madness, no beautiful disaster waiting to swallow them whole. It was slow, deep, tender. A declaration, a promise, a milestone. His hands framed her face, thumbs tracing her cheeks as if memorizing every line. Elena wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, their lips moving together in a warm, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of a vow. Below them, the city blazed, and yet in all that brilliance, Elena felt she was standing in a private universe, where the storm had become only a distant whisper, and the two of them were all that remained. When they finally parted, Lucian pressed a kiss to her forehead. Elena, he murmured, I love you. She looked at him, chest tight with too many emotions to name. I love you too, she replied, soft but as clear as the city lights beneath them. And under that sky of steel and stars, they kissed again. Deeper, hungrier, yet still beautiful, still tender, like a scene destined to replay itself 1,000 times inside the heart. 6 months slipped by like a slow-motion reel. Half of it was the roaring success of the European campaign. The other half was long evenings in the penthouse, where Elena found a peace she once thought belonged to a horizon she could never reach. One early October morning, Lucian drove her out of the city without telling her why. The black SUV rolled over cobblestone streets, then through the suburbs, then deeper into the woods. The rows of trees along the road had turned brilliant gold, fiery orange, and deep red, like a rainstorm of sunlight falling onto the earth. Elena rested her head against the window, watching leaves fly past like butterflies. The air was crisp, but her heart felt strangely warm. "Where are we going?" she asked, half laughing, half curious. Lucian glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting in one of those rare smiles, the kind that made her chest tighten instantly. "To a place I think you should see again." That was all, no explanation, no unnecessary words. But Elena had already begun to guess. When the car stopped among the pines blanketed in golden leaves, Elena recognized the familiar path. The wind moved through the branches, sending leaves swirling like little yellow notes dancing through the air. "Lucien," she whispered. He offered his hand, warm, steady. "It's a beautiful day," he said, "and I want to share a memory." They walked along the trail, the moss-covered stones soft and glistening under the slanted sunlight. The autumn forest felt like it was holding its breath. Only the whisper of wind threaded between Elena's heartbeats. As the sound of water grew clearer, her chest tightened. Then they stepped into the familiar clearing, where sunlight fell like a thin golden veil. The waterfall before them was white as silk, the mist rising in delicate ribbons that wrapped around the scene, and the clear pool below reflected the sky like a perfect mirror. Elena's breath hitched. She remembered every detail of that afternoon: the sky, the chill, the freedom, and Lucian's eyes when he stood among the trees like time itself had forgotten him. "Why did you bring me back here?" Elena asked, her voice small in the wind. Lucian stood behind her, hands in his coat pockets. The breeze brushed his dark hair to the side. "Because I owed you something I couldn't say that day." Elena turned. Lucian's eyes, the same eyes that once closed themselves off, that once fought their own truth for months, were now open in a way so gentle it made her knees weaken. "When I saw you," Lucian began, pausing to steady his breath, "right here, you were standing under the waterfall, completely unguarded, completely free. You were beautiful, Elena, but not the kind of beauty that drives people crazy." He shook his head softly. "You were beautiful in a way that made something in me crack open." Elena felt her legs threaten to give out. Lucian stepped closer, each word stitching itself into her heart. "I spent my whole life with rules, with walls, with lines I swore I would never cross." He looked at the waterfall, eyes reflecting some distant memory. "But that day," he said quietly, "when I saw you in the water, I saw my own freedom too, a freedom I didn't even know I was missing." Elena pressed a hand against her chest, afraid her voice would break into sobs if she spoke. Lucian stepped closer until the distance between them dissolved into mist. "I was scared," he admitted, "scared that if I touched you, all my rules would fall apart." Elena brushed her fingers against his sleeve. "And they did," she whispered. Lucian looked at her, warmth lighting his eyes, an entirely willing surrender. "Yes, and I have never, not even once, regretted it." He exhaled, pulling his hand from his pocket. Then he knelt. Right where, 6 months ago, he had forced himself to look away to stay sane. Elena covered her mouth, tears spilling instantly. "Lucian." He opened a small velvet box. The ring sparkled with reflections of the water and the sky. "Elena Voss," he said, his voice deep and steady as if he were making a vow to the entire sky. "You made every rule in my life feel small. Every law I've ever held, protected like armor, suddenly became meaningless." Mist drifted between his words, making them softer, truer. "If I have to break 1,000 more rules just to love you, I will." A drop of water fell. Elena didn't know if it was waterfall mist or her own tears. Her voice choked. "I loved you long before you knew." Lucian looked up at her, waiting for her answer as if it would determine the rest of his life. Elena laughed through her tears, stepped forward, and pulled him to his feet. And of course I say yes. She kissed him, right beneath the waterfall, inside the drifting mist, in a forest glowing gold like a dream. The kiss was deep, soft, warm, and so beautiful that time itself seemed to pause to watch them. No more rules, no more storms, no more power distance or fear. Just two people, standing where destiny began, choosing each other again, this time with a vow. 1 year after the waterfall proposal, the Hale Lux glass garden had transformed into a private galaxy. Night crept in, and hundreds of golden bulbs floated overhead, slender strands hanging from the transparent ceiling, forming an artificial constellation so breathtaking it felt unreal. Greenery and soft white flowers lined the aisle, reflecting the warm glow and making the space look like a garden suspended in the clouds. Guests stood in 2 rows, falling silent the moment the piano began to play. Lucian stood beneath the glass archway, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, a satin bow tie in place, his fingers gripping a cufflink as though that single gesture was the only thing keeping his racing heart contained. Theo stood beside him, best man, lifelong partner in chaos, the man who had kept Lucian sane for years, leaned in and whispered, "Don't faint. I am not dragging the CEO of Hale Lux out of his own wedding." Lucian inhaled, fighting for composure, though the corner of his mouth betrayed him. "I won't faint, but I might kill you later." Theo patted his shoulder like someone comforting a nervous lion. "I've saved you from yourself for years. Tonight I'm off duty." Lucian's quiet laugh dissolved into the air just as everyone turned toward the entrance. The glass doors opened, a breeze slipped in, and Elena stepped into the garden. She wore a soft white silk gown, each step sending the fabric rippling like waves. Her hair flowed loosely, a few strands lifted gently by the wind, framing her like a heroine walking straight out of a film where the light knew exactly where to fall. Lucian forgot how to breathe. Not because she was beautiful, she had always been beautiful, but because of the way she was looking at him, gentle, certain, unshaken, as though every step she took was a step toward the place she had always belonged. Richard Sterling, Lucian's uncle, the same chairman who once questioned him in the boardroom, stood before them now as efficient. He looked both proud and mildly bewildered, as if he still wasn't sure how his frostbitten nephew had turned into a man staring at his bride like she was oxygen. Elena reached Lucian's side, her hand slipping into his. The moment they touched, the whispers, the music, even the wind fell away. Richard's voice rose, warm and solemn. "Today we are not merely witnessing a wedding, we are witnessing two people, once bound by rules, fears, and old scars, find each other in the most unexpected way. Through a moment, by a waterfall." Laughter rippled through the garden. Elena's cheeks flushed, and Lucian allowed a proud, wistful smile to surface, as if that moment had been a secret he had protected and was now finally allowed to share. Richard continued, "Before the vows, we invite Theo to speak." Theo stepped forward. The crowd buzzed. Everyone knew his speech could veer from comedic to emotional without warning. He began, "Being Lucian's best friend is not easy. Sometimes I've had to knock sense into him. Verbally, I mean, mostly." Laughter broke out, and then Elena arrived, free, sharp, fearless, and somehow patient enough to see past the fortress he called a personality. Something strange happened. He started living. He looked at both of them. In the middle of work, media storms, and the armor of rules he carried like a second skin, Elena made him take it off. "No one deserves him more than you, and no one deserves you more than him." His voice roughened. "So please, be happy, for the company's sake." The garden erupted in laughter, but Elena's eyes stung. She hadn't been there for Lucian's battles, but Theo had. Every scar that Lucian carried had been witnessed by this man. Lucian turned to her, his eyes softened by the golden lights overhead. It was time for the vows. He held her hands with both of his, as if letting go would make the world collapse. "Elena," he said, his voice so deep that everything else fell silent. "Not because you're beautiful, not because you're strong, not because you're brilliant, He leaned closer, their foreheads almost touching. But because you made the word living mean something to me? Elena laughed through her tears. She tightened her grip. Lucian, you think you're cold, but the truth is your heart is so big you've spent years trying to hide it. What I love isn't your power or success. It's the way you learn to love me without fear. Her voice trembled, but was unwavering. You are home, and I choose you, from the waterfall to every day after. Lucian closed his eyes for half a heartbeat, as if those words were light piercing every old wound. Richard smiled and declared, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Hundreds of golden bulbs flared brighter, like stars blessing the moment. Lucian slid his hand to her waist, pulled her close, and kissed her beneath the glowing sky. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't restrained. It was wide open, like a promise that every storm now lived behind them, and ahead lay only light. Guests applauded. Theo whistled. Richard wiped his eyes. And in that luminous glass garden, where Elena and Lucian held each other like two stars in their own galaxy, everyone knew they were witnessing a story destined to become company legend. And indeed, years later, whenever a new employee asked about them, someone would smirk, fold their arms, and say, let me tell you about the waterfall.